Hey besties, it's Joel and I'm bi actually. Today I'm back after 2 months to bring you a video that has been long awaited. I am reading every single book that Isaac reads in Heartstopper Season 2. I'm gonna put these down because these are really heavy. If you've yet to check out the first video that I did last year, then I would recommend go watching that first because 1, it was so much fun to produce, and 2, the reaction to that video is one of my favorites. Just seeing all of the warmth and the positivity and the love that everyone gave me was just phenomenal. And I'll have a link to it in the description down below, but I knew as soon as Season 2 was announced, I knew that I was going to be doing this video again. I hope that you're doing well and that you're looking after yourselves. If you've yet to grab your beverage of your choice, then please do so, and also have a drink of water because we must remain well and hydrated. And if you've yet to check out any of my social medias, I would recommend you do so because I post some extra bookish content that you're not gonna see here. Also, come join us over at the Cozy Kingdom Discord, where we have a lot of fun, chaos, and hijinks, and also our favourite book club, where we read books from different genres every month. Before we get into all of the Isaac books, I do have something that I want to unbox. Presenting this package from YouTube. I got this way earlier in the year. I feel like this video is the perfect video to do it in because this was probably one of my first, like, viral videos that I had made. There is also a letter. This is so cute. And then we have the silver play button. Oh my god, it's so reflective. I can see myself crying. I never thought I would reach this point. There are no words to convey how thankful I am to all of you for changing my life. Like, I know a lot of you comment about how I've helped change your lives by introducing reading to you again, but I don't think a lot of you understand, like, how meaningful your support has meant to me over these past 3 years, and how grateful I am to all of you for supporting me and interacting with everything that I post, because, like, I wouldn't be here where I am now. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I'm doing without your support. It means the world to me. Not it just aligning on the billy. It's gonna stay there now for the rest of this introduction. Season 2 of Heartstopper was a lot of fun to watch, building upon the plot of the graphic novel with the Paris trip, but also providing us with some new plot lines exclusive to the show as well, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Now back to Isaac. The reading list this time, thankfully, was a lot easier to compile, as I basically just DM'd Alice Oseman and asked them for the list this time, and they gave me a very comprehensive list. Cross-referencing it with the show, I was able to compile these 18. You got that right. 1A. 18. I already know that he's a reader, but Isaac truly is the MVP of Truham's school library. And he's really stepped up his reading game this season. And we'll get into this later on, but there are definitely some recurring themes in the books that Isaac reads this season, and I love the way that the books also tell their own story in some way or hint towards some plot developments in the show. My media literacy skills are really popping off with this one. That's all to say, this might be my longest video today, but I don't think anyone would mind that, given the fact that apparently I have the voice for a podcast. However, Heartstopper came out in August. I'm now recording this in November. So what exactly happened in the time between then? Well, I had originally intended to do this video in August, however, with complications with the SAG-AFTRA strikes and me having to email them to confirm whether Heartstopper was part of the strikes or not, by that time, there was so much going on in my life, like I was trying to redecorate and I still needing to redecorate, that I basically just had no time for, like, long-form content creation. And I think that's been a recurring theme this year because I've been able to do a lot of short-form and that's been doing very well. I definitely would love to go back to doing more consistent long-form content in 2024. That will be the year we innovate and annihilate, because 2023 was not it. But all of that changes today. With Heartstopper Volume 5 coming out very, very soon, I feel like it's the perfect time for me to do this video now, and I cannot wait to be sharing this journey with all of you once again. But to remind you of how this video works, I'll be reading each book, and in my review, I'll be going over what I liked, what I disliked about the book as per usual, but then going into why I feel like Isaac chose this book to read, whether it was required reading or for another reason, or was it a conscious decision to include that book for some foreshadowing, or can it link to something about the writing of the show? So without further ado, let us get into all of the books that Isaac reads in Heartstopper Season 2, but first, let us hear a message from today's sponsor. Today, I'm thrilled to partner with Skillshare, a wonderful place filled with thousands of online classes to inspire you on your creative journeys. It does enable every single one of my ADHD hyperfixations, but in a way that's fun and interactive. The sheer breadth and depth of these classes is something to behold, with everything from creative writing to social media to video game design. I literally find that if there's a creative passion you want to pursue, there is probably probably a Skillshare class on it. Plus, you can complete classes for badges and certificates, which completely fulfills the gifted child in me's need for validation. Currently, I'm taking a path of creating memorable characters with classes from Daniel Jose Older, Saba Tahir, and Lindsay Summers, and they really help me hone the essences of my characters as I work on the first draft of my Gothic Dark Academia Wub Wub. I've also been focusing on increasing my productivity through Productivity for Creators, Systems, Organization, and Workflow by Ali Abdul. This year has been a disorganized mess for me, and I'd rather not repeat that in 2024, but I do feel like this class is helping me structure a working life for myself, and that's really great. So try out Skillshare for yourself, and the first 500 people to use the link in the description down below will get 1 month free of Skillshare and 40% off their first year of Skillshare membership, which is pretty iconic if I do say so myself. So after this, go and find a class that can help fuel your creativity, and for now, we can get back to today's video. This book is a small nugget of melancholy, emotion, and an exploration of a love that makes you feel bigger than anything. I Love This Part by Tilly Walden is my first Tilly Walden book, and I know that the booksellers at Mr. B's Emporium in Bath and my friend May, who works at Toppings, will be overjoyed to learn that I'm finally reading Tilly Walden. I've been recommended Walden's On a Sunbeam for quite some time, but I feel like I Love This Part was definitely a nice taster of what Walden's work can be. Isaac reads this book when walking to school with Charlie and Tao, and this story follows two girls in a small town in the USA who spends time together, listening to music and watching videos, and form an unexpected but ultimately failing relationship. And this story also explores the struggles of sexuality as well. And I absolutely fell in love with the story as it was being told. There were definitely moments of dialogue that spoke to me, but the frames that were silent spoke even louder than the words did. And the silence of the frames really conveyed a lot of the story and emphasized the nature of the story that Walden was trying to tell. There's just something about Walden's art style that I really like, and I'm really excited to check out their other works as well, especially On a Sunbeam now that I've read this. And it didn't take me long to read this, and I find that it's a really nice start to the reading list as a whole. And as for why Isaac might read it, I do feel like he is a fan of Tilly Walden and would be wanting to check out their other works as well, or has already read their other works. I do feel like this book has actually been used as part of a subtle foreshadowing of Isaac's character journey throughout the season, as we see that this season Isaac has his own struggles in terms of his sexuality and romanticism, especially when James has come into the picture as well, especially as we see how his friends often prioritize romance in terms of conversation. And I'm not sure if this foreshadowing was intentional, but it's a clever nod in the first episode nonetheless. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book and I would recommend it. So I have to admit, I didn't read Ace of Spades for this video given the fact that I read it multiple times last year for varying reasons, so I do feel like I have quite a good grip of the story and can still like give you my thoughts and opinions based off of what I read last year. And Isaac reads this book whilst he's at the sleepover at Charlie's house where, you know, Imogen gets invited and all of that stuff. Ace of Spades is a thriller filled with twists and turns, and one that really carves out the role of institutionalized racism within academic institutions. And this basically follows two students at a private academy whose secrets are coming to light through an anonymous texter called Aces. It's kind of like a Get Out meets Gossip Girl kind of situation. We have Devon, a talented musician, and Chiamaka, a head girl, who both must team up in order to discover who's behind the texts, before they're pulled into something much darker and much more sinister, much like the lighting right now. To me, this book is definitely required wire reading for anyone and everyone, as it's really able to succinctly and impactfully display the effects of institutionalized racism, queerphobia, white supremacy, and really elitism and the intersections of all of them as well. It cuts deep and really unearths some harsh truths that people do need to hear, and they're really neatly wrapped in this book. And the summer edition that came out last year as well is actually gorgeous. I really love it. It delves into the way marginalized people are made to feel when existing in certain spaces, and one of my favorite quotes from the book actually delves into this as it says, "I stopped myself from apologizing because what would I even be sorry for? Existing too loud?" Chiamaka and Devon are just so developed as characters. You become invested in their stories, and I just love that so much. And I love the way that Farida just wrote them throughout the story. As for Isaac, I do feel like he read this for two reasons. Firstly, is basically a point of foreshadowing because the first word of the title is Ace of Spades, and so I feel like it's a slight hint towards, you know, Isaac beginning that journey towards being Arrow Ace later in the season. And other than that, given how Isaac read Noughts and Crosses in season 1, I do feel like it's a continuing theme that he'll be reading books that kind of go over themes of racism and institutionalized racism as well. Farida is actually also coming out with another book next year called Where Sleeping Girls Lie, and the cover is actually so gorgeous, and it's definitely one that I'll be delving into soon, I assure you, and I would highly recommend pre-ordering this one and picking up Ace of Spades if you haven't already. We're now on to the first book of episode 2, and we're immediately hit with an impactful and hard-hitting read. Isaac is first seen reading We Are Okay by Nina LaCour during Parents' Evening, where he's told that he should participate more in class. But that's not all. He's then seen reading it in the hotel room in Paris, not once, not twice, but thrice, with the third time being him falling asleep whilst reading the book. This book is actually the one that appears most in the season, so I do feel like it confirms two things. One, this book might be the one that took him the longest to read, but also two, it is confirmed now that he can read multiple books at once, something that I don't think I can really do. We Are Okay follows Maren, who has left everything behind from her old life, taking only her phone, wallet, and a picture of her mother. The narrative is divided between present-day New York, where her best friend Mabel is coming to visit, and her past in California, where the events that led to her leaving slowly rise to the surface. And it's in this emptied New York dorm room over winter break that Maren will have to confront the loneliness that has made a home in her heart. We Are Okay is a book that tackles notions of loss, grief, and loneliness so well, and it's a book that I wish that I had read when I was younger. There are literally just so many moments where I wish I could just go and hug Maren and tell her that everything would be okay. She does eventually realize this herself, but like there were just times where I really felt for her. And there is just something about this book that makes it feel like a safe place for you to pour your heart out. It's almost a cathartic read in a way. It's a character-driven story about a girl overcoming so many emotions and eventually realizing that she will be okay in the end, and I think we do need more stories like that. And this is definitely a slower paced book, so I would be prepared to take it in bit by bit, just like Isaac did throughout the season. The relationship between Mabel and Maren was also an interesting one to read, because not only was it one between friends, but also former lovers as well, and I do feel like that dynamic added an extra sense of complexity to the relationship, but also an underlying tension to everything as well. And I think the main thing that I took away from this book is that if things aren't okay now, they will be in the future, as so succinctly put when LaCour writes, "I was okay just a moment ago. I will learn how to be okay again." Okay, so I have two explanations, one literal and one symbolic, as for why Isaac was reading this book. The first explanation is that we know Isaac loves reading queer stories, and even if they're sad, I feel like he finds some kind of solace in reading about them. However, the symbolic explanation is one that I feel like might hit home a little bit more. This book tackles the theme of loneliness and how often we as queer people can feel lonely even though we're surrounded by multiple queer people, and I feel like this is exactly where it lies for Isaac. I think he feels a sense of loneliness from not seeing things the way that his friends do, and it's the fact that this book appears multiple times in the season, especially where romance is concerned, that kind of reinforces this point to me. And I think it's interesting how we can see this book as a potential tool to emphasize the loneliness that Isaac feels. However, this doesn't last for the entire season. It is a sadder take, but I feel like with Isaac's character arc this season, it isn't out of the realm of possibility for him. I really loved this book, and I wish I had it when I was younger, and so it's one that I would recommend you to read. Honestly, I never had any thought about the importance of my name until reading this play, but this is just such a funny play about performance, secret identities, and mischief. And Isaac's reading this one in the corner shop when Tao walks in and basically confesses his attraction to Elle in front of the two of them. The Importance of Being Earnest, a trivial comedy for serious people by Oscar Wilde, was the only play of this book that I read. I wanted to remain on topic, otherwise I would be here for 20 minutes talking about the other plays in this book. And the play is one of Oscar Wilde's more notable works alongside The Picture of Dorian Gray, following Jack and Algernon, two gentlemen who invent secret identities in order to navigate two very different social spheres of society, the big city and also the country. However, things do get a bit complicated when Algernon assumes Jack's alter ego of Earnest and accidentally causes Earnest to be engaged to two different women at the exact same time. And I listened to this play via Audible, as there was a free version up included in my membership with Stephen Fry in, which was such a pleasure to listen to, and it was just absolutely hilarious. It's witty, it's clever, and I would really love to see a live production of this play, even translated into a modern sense, although I don't really know how that would work unless there's some element of catfishing involved. Algernon was so annoying though, because he's basically like this upper class white man who basically thinks that he can do whatever he wants without thinking of the consequences, and it just irritated me when Jack was getting visibly annoyed by Algernon doing things that were ruining his life, and he was like, oh, it's fine, like this is just all a game, and it's like, it's not a game, it's someone's life. My favorite character, however, was Gwendolyn, because that woman is so clever, so smart, and I just love the way that Oscar Wilde constructed her identity, and it was just thoroughly enjoyable to listen and read her words and like get her personality. One of the neat things that I noticed about this play as well was when Jack was basically talking about Earnest being dead, he noted how Earnest wanted to be buried in Paris as it was his final wish. And guess where Oscar Wilde is buried? And I just found that to be such a lovely connection, as it really shows Oscar Wilde's love of Paris, kind of starts fueling that love of Paris for Isaac as well, as he's starting his foray into French literature. And so why do I think Isaac read this? Well, first of all, Oscar Wilde is a gay writer, and so I think again Isaac is trying to consume a lot of literature by queer writers. But also I can see this relating to the Tao Elle storyline a little bit, as we see later on that Tao is basically trying to like dress himself up for Elle, getting his hair cut for Elle, going on dates that Elle would like. He's kind of assuming this like persona of something Elle doesn't see him as that really challenges like whether they can work in a relationship or not. And I feel like that's a clever nod to the kind of conflict that happens later in the season. But also this book does begin what I would consider Isaac's romance readathon, where he basically does read a lot of books to do with romance and sexual awakening, and I feel like this then begins his kind of journey towards realizing that he's aromantic asexual. On the other side though, we do see him read more books about pain, trauma, and exploration, so there's definitely a dual narrative being constructed here. Overall though, this was such a funny play, and I would recommend listening to it, as I feel like it would help boost your enjoyment of the play more than just reading it. At this point, Emily Henry is becoming one of my favourite lit-fic romance authors, and I'm not mad about that whatsoever. And I'm especially convinced that I will be doing a read and ranked of her when Funny Story comes out, because just the way that she writes her books, I fall in love with them every single time. And we see Isaac reading Book Lovers by Emily Henry twice, both times when speaking to James. And immediately, there are definitely two reasons that I can think of why Isaac would be reading this book. The first one is definitely the fact that Book Lovers has a romance within it, and you know, this continues Isaac reading romance throughout the season. But the second one I think is a bit more literal. The title is called Book Lovers, and James and Isaac are both book lovers, and you know, they work together to put together that Read with Pride table, and I think it's this connection between them that then further hints towards James' attraction towards Isaac, but also their shared love of reading. Book Lovers follows Nora Stevens, a cutthroat literary agent who's whisked away by her sister to Sunshine Falls, North Carolina, as her sister believes that Nora needs to become the heroine in her own story. However, how successful that is up to debate, as Nora keeps running into Charlie Lastra, brooding book editor that Nora has met numerous times with less than ideal circumstances. But as they're thrown together time and time again, they both might start to unravel the carefully crafted stories that they've written about themselves. Book Lovers to me is essentially such a perfect romance that captures everything that I'm looking for in a romantic read, whilst also giving us the depth of a literary fiction piece that I just think is so intrinsic to Emily Henry's writing style that I love it. I just found myself relating to Nora as a career-orientated person who needs to have some sense of control in her life. And I even felt so emotional when Emily Henry writes that all these years spent thinking I had superhuman self-control, and now I realize I just never put anything I wanted to badly in front of myself. Because it's true, we often stop ourselves from really getting what we want because we try and convince ourselves that we don't deserve it for a multitude of reasons. The unlearning of that is a huge step, and it's phenomenal. Furthermore, I just loved how the relationship between Nora and Charlie was just built up so wonderfully, and the way that they interact with each other throughout the book was sweet and oftentimes like, but then like you really feel like you want them to get together, and it's great, it's amazing. And they had such chemistry that I was literally turning the pages each and every time to see where they would end up, and there were just lines in the book that I absolutely did feel called out on, such as, Nora, he just barely smiles, you're in books. Of course you don't have a life. None of us do. There's always something too good to read. Yes, I do spend a lot of my time reading. Do I indulge in other hobbies? Sure, but like reading is always going to be that number one thing for me, or like just exploring narratives in general. Emily Henry just adds so much depth and realism to her books, and like such as fleshing out the other relationships, such as the one between Nora and her sister, and going into depth as to why there's a bit of conflict there, and like the things that Nora had to do in order to support her sister. It kind of reminds me of Nina Riva from Malibu Rising, and the fact that I'm relating to those two characters so much means that there might be something I need to unpack in therapy, but you know, overall Book Lovers is just another Emily Henry book that has solidified its place in my heart as one of my favourite romance/lit-fic reads. And again, I do feel like she is working her way up to be one of my favourite romance/lit-fic authors, and I just recommend reading any of her books because they are so good. You know, I also dreamed a dream of time gone by. The time that I spent reading this book. We see Isaac reading Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, translated by Christine Donner, when he's on the bus towards going to Paris. Now, from this point, it is pretty obvious why he's reading this book, as it's probably one of the most popular works of French literature to ever exist, except for the one that we'll be getting onto later. And it covers a vital part of French history depicting a narrative of freedom, redemption, and retaliation. However, how he's able to quickly read this book, I will not understand, because when he's on the coach, he is halfway through that book, and then by the time they reach the hotel, he is done. He is done. And like the coach is like 5 to 8 hours depending on where you are in England, and so I'm just wondering, like, how fast can he read, especially if, like, the text is, like, as small as it is in this book. He truly does have a reading speed that I do not possess. But going back to explain Les Miserables, it is Victor Hugo's tale of injustice, heroism, and love that follows Jean Valjean, an escaped convict determined to put his criminal past behind him. But his attempts to become a respected member of his community are constantly put under threat, especially when another man is mistaken for him and arrested in his place, and also Inspector Javert, who basically is relentless in his investigations to find Jean Valjean. However, it's not only for himself that Jean Valjean should stay free, as he has promised to take care of Cosette, the daughter of Fantine, a woman who's turned to prostitution as a result of poverty. This novel examines the nature of love, law, and justice, the history of France, politics, religion, amongst other themes that run through the course of this novel. Okay, so besties, I do have to admit, I have not finished this book. It's not a DNF, it's more so I will return to you at a later date. Like, I really wanted to read this for the video, however, I just got to a point where I was reading it and really feeling invested, but then constantly being reminded of how far I have left to go and being demotivated and almost falling into a reading slump. And it was then I realized that sometimes I just need to stop reading books when I'm no longer having fun with them. And so this also shows there are times where I don't finish books, and that's okay, but I do think I will be returning to this probably on Kindle. However, for a partial review, I absolutely loved what I read, and I think that Christine Donner's translation is one that I'm so glad that I picked up, because a lot of people do recommend that translation as the translation, and the way that Hugo writes with such flourish and nuance while also expanding on the history of France is one that I absolutely enjoyed. I find that he's really able to capture the essence of time so that we can understand the struggle that these characters go through, and to give us, the reader, a historical account of what France was like at that time. It's not just a novel about history, it's a novel about love, the love between characters, and also I would say the love that Victor Hugo has for France. As cited when he wrote at age 75, "I am not one of these sweet-tempered old men. I am still exasperated and violent. I shout and I feel indignant and I cry, woe to anyone who harms France. I do declare I will die a fanatic patriot." And it is a very long book, yes. But I think this is one of the only times where I feel like the length of the book does justify the kind of necessity for it. Although there is also an abridged version for people who can't commit to the length of this book. And I also just love that at one point, Les Mis basically describes me, Isaac, and every other book lover in existence in one sentence. He never went out without a book under his arm, and he often came back with two. Which basically means that every time we leave the house, we always go to a bookstore and buy a book to return home with us. And if that's not the most me thing that's ever been said, I will be returning to Les Mis at some point soon, and I definitely feel like I will be recording my experiences in a TikTok or reel. So keep an eye out for that when it comes. But overall, I really loved what I read so far, and based on what I read, I would recommend it. This might not exactly fit, but I do feel like this is the best shit for this book. The Little Prince is a worldwide classic, and I can't even believe it took me this long to read it, but I absolutely enjoyed it. We see Isaac reading this during the Paris trip, where he's talking to James with the book firmly clutched in his arms. So The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, translated by TVF Cuff, follows a pilot stranded in the desert who meets a little prince who asks him to draw a sheep. And even though he's in disbelief, the pilot kind of just goes along with it, and that begins a recount of the little prince's journey from his own planet to ours. This was such an intriguing book, especially because I feel like it gives a similar vibe to Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, in the sense that although it's written for children, adults can take away a much larger and more significant meaning as well. The story is very beautifully written, filled with wonder and adventure, and inspired by the author's own experiences as a pilot. The story depicts how the prince is traveling through different planets and meeting different people and gaining different experiences wherever he goes. And he learns about very different adult behaviors through a series of very interesting encounters. And in the end, he decides to return to where he came from, if you interpret it that way. It's a really short book, and it didn't take me that long to read, but it really does pack a punch in the short amount of pages that it has. And the illustrations that are included really do breathe a lot more life into the story as well, and really make it feel like a whimsical children's book. And especially reading it as an adult, there are definitely times where I feel like I got more of the adult meaning that the author was trying to convey, especially when we consider how we as adults sometimes forget to have fun in the present and are instead hyperfixated on a bunch of other stresses and worries, as we should really be trying to embrace fun in times of sadness. Given the fact that The Little Prince is the second most translated book in the world, only being overtaken by the Bible, it's definitely clear why Isaac would want to read this, given the fact that it's one of the most popular pieces of French literature of all time. And so The Little Prince is definitely one of those books that I would recommend people read read and see if they can gather any meaning of their own. And I will definitely be returning to this at some point in the future to see if I get any other meaning from this book. But for now, like the pilot, I will be waiting for The Little Prince to return. The Awakening by Kate Chopin is one of the earliest works of feminist literature, and at its time of publication, it was probably criticized and torn apart by men, and Chopin's reputation was probably irreparably damaged. But I absolutely enjoyed reading this book, and we see Isaac reading it when Tao is dancing on the bridge in France, which is certainly a choice. The Awakening displays Edna Pontillier, a wife and a mother who refuses to be caged by her married and domestic life, and instead claims moral and erotic freedom for herself through marital affairs, or illicit affairs, Taylor Swift. For its time, it was a novel that dared to challenge a lot of the societal norms that were present during this period, and it was a courageous publication by Chopin herself, and it's now one of her greatest literary achievements, and it's always so sad when an author's work is only recognized after they're dead. This was such a powerful story, a very short one at that, but I feel like Chopin's writing style is really carefully crafted, and the story is constructed, showing Edna pursuing her freedom and finally gaining it, but at a very, very high cost. I mean, we see it on the cover, the symbolism of water and the ocean as freedom can't be ignored, especially when Chopin writes, "The voice of the sea is seductive, never ceasing, whispering, clamoring, murmuring, inviting the soul to wander in the abysses of solitude." Especially with what happens at the end of the story, I feel like the foreshadowing here is utterly exquisite. One thing that I also loved was the dynamic of the angel and the devil on her shoulder, but in the form of conformity and freedom, presented through Madame Adele and Mademoiselle Riez. And it presented such an intriguing struggle for Edna as she tries to juggle these two worlds and ultimately coming to her own decision. And I think there's just something that Chopin writes that is ultimately beautiful, and it is, "The bird that would soar above the level plane of tradition and prejudice must have strong wings. It is a sad spectacle to see the weaklings bruised, exhausted, fluttering back to earth." It shows that not everyone can challenge societal norms and rise above it and gain the freedom that Edna seeks, but also this was not only right for women during this part of history, but also many other marginalized people as well, where you're presented with two choices of having to be really strong and independent so you can gain the freedom that you seek, or basically submitting to the system that is ultimately against you and assimilating into it in the hopes that you can basically force yourself to be happy in the situation. Thinking about why Isaac read it, I do feel like this will tie into his later awakening of being Arrow Ace and just throw himself wholeheartedly into his identity and love himself for it. I do find that Isaac is reading a lot of like 18th, 19th and 20th century authors, and I do just feel like in that sense me and him would have a lot to discuss because I also love 18th to 20th century literature so much. Okay, but have you ever read a book that has a lot of twists and turns but ultimately delivers a statement about life itself? But that's how I felt reading The Outsider / The Stranger by Albert Camus, which was the book that Isaac read when he was in the Louvre visiting the Mona Lisa, which honestly, why would you be reading a book whilst seeing the Mona Lisa? You should be focusing on the Mona Lisa. I read the version that was translated by Sandra Smith, which I believe is the same version that Isaac also reads. The Outsider is a story about Missor, a settler in French Algeria who basically learns that his mother has died. And weeks after his mother's funeral, he kills an unnamed Arab man. This book tackles themes of philosophical thought with notions of existentialism, absurdism, and honestly, it was just a very weird book to me. In the introduction, Sandra Smith notes how she listened to a recording of this book in order to get the nuances of the translation, and I just love the effort made by translators to ensure that their translations of books are more aligned with what authors intended. Missor as a character himself is so intriguing because he's a man who's so indifferent to the world. He doesn't care about things, he doesn't care about his actions nor the consequences of them, as we'll later see. And I just view him as a kite merely gliding through life waiting for things to happen. And I think he just hopes the kite will glide him to somewhere nice and comfortable. Like, he doesn't even love the woman that he's with. He doesn't really have any feelings about marrying her or anything, and she kind of just accepts that. Especially when, spoiler alert, he's sentenced to the guillotine. He eventually realizes his indifferences do make him happy, as it makes him feel like he's part of the universe that we're living in. I feel like I do need to reread this to further understand it a bit more, but I will say the Missalt being called the Antichrist in this book was absolutely hilarious to me, especially because he does not see a point in religion whatsoever alongside a lot of other things. And I think that Camus' writing throughout this book was beautiful. This is a book translated from French, and I do feel like Isaac is continuing his French exploration reads by reading The Outsider, especially because it is a classic and one that a lot of people do read and recommend. But I feel like if we take the title of The Outsider outside of the sense of relating to societal norms and we apply it to Isaac, I feel like we can apply a different lens to it. As I do feel like there are times throughout this season, as we've referenced earlier, where Isaac does feel like an outsider, where he feels like he doesn't belong with everyone else, and I feel like especially with the conversations that he has with James and the Paris gang, I do feel like it comes with a lot of conflicting feelings for him as well. Apart from that though, this book definitely was an intriguing read, and maybe maybe I might return to it at some point in the future. Where's Wally? Where is Wally? Wally is where? Honestly, I would have dressed in a proper Where's Wally outfit, however, I didn't want to suffer the humiliation of trying to put together a cheap costume, so I decided to go for a more modern interpretation of Where's Wally instead. And you know, I think it came out quite nice. The stripes are there, the glasses are there, the jeans are there, although you can't see them. And Isaac is finding Wally with Nick and Charlie right before Tao comes in to explain that he and Elle kissed, which was such a fun moment in the show. To review this book, it was good. I had fun finding Wally. I don't even know what I'm doing right now, honestly. There's not really much I can say about this book, but I do feel like the addition of Where's Wally that they used is quite interesting, as this is the great picture hunt, especially relating to the fact that they just went to a museum. I feel like it's a way to kind of subtly tie in the scenes together, but also I think they either sold this in the museum gift shop or Isaac brought it along with him, as I think he thought it would be a great activity to do with all of his friends one night. I do want to give this outfit a quick compliment though, as we're not in this book for that long, but I do just want to say like how nice I look in it. I also do want to say actually that the next book on our list is Birthday by Meredith Russo, and whilst I did read this book and did want to talk about it, as I was looking on Goodreads, it turns out that the author is allegedly an abuser. So I don't want to like encourage hate or kind of dig up old news slash like try and cancel anyone, but I think in good faith I just can't review or recommend this book because of the allegations surrounding the author from like 2019-2020 time, especially because I don't want to be giving a potential abuser a platform. But as for why Isaac picked it up, I do believe that partially is to do with the fact that it is someone's birthday that episode, but it is also a story about two people who are intrinsically bonded for life, and that is something that Isaac does with reading, and that ties into the romances that Isaac's been reading all season long. And now I can just return to being a Wally. You'll definitely be seeing this look at least once or twice more in this video because there are a lot of blue books and this is the only blue jumper that I have, and given how cold it is in the UK at the minute, I don't want to take the chance of getting too cold while recording. So I remember reading Around the World in 80 Days when I was younger, and in recent years being inspired to write a book inspired by this one, but I don't think I'm going to go into a lot of detail about it, however, because every time I speak about a book into existence to one of my friends, they immediately become attached to it and want me to write it. But Isaac reads Around the World in 80 Days whilst he's out exploring Paris with his friends, which I thought was such a cute montage of scenes, and it's such a cute moment in the show that really solidifies the Paris gang as a whole. And not gonna lie, it did make me miss Paris a little bit, and so I do want to try and go back at some point next year. Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, translated by Michael Glencross, is a novel following Phileas Fogg, who basically bets that he can travel around the world in 80 days. He and his French valet Passepartout travel through distant lands, going on adventures, solving conflicts, all to try and race back before the 80 days are up. And to me, I feel like this novel is one that defines exploration, much like Gulliver's Travels, much like Robinson Crusoe to a certain degree. I feel like there were many novels written during this period that defined what exploration could be, how it was to explore distant lands. Phileas Fogg is obsessive with time, trying to make sure they're on track constantly. But it is also interesting that Jules Verne is French, but then also made the Englishman the main character. That's an analysis for another day. I do wish some of these characters were a bit more developed though, and now reading it as an adult, there are just many more things that I notice, especially as I like read it from a post-colonial lens. I had a few revelations, shall we say, because the writing of Jules Verne is certainly something. The way that he talks about kind of going to these foreign lands and almost praising colonization and British imperialism, although there is like a little bit of skepticism about the extent of British imperialism, but ultimately it does come to praising colonialism and going as far as to calling foreign people savages and presenting them in like an antagonistic light, and that they clearly benefited from the advancements from the British Empire, and like it's almost as like Jules Verne is doing like an impartial stance on imperialism and colonialism. However, as we've learned recently with Watermelon, in times where colonization is happening in the world, we cannot be impartial to it. And yeah, overall, I just think that Jules Verne is another French novelist that Isaac chose to read, and especially given the fact that he's been reading a lot of books to do with race and racism, I'm sure he's picked up on a lot of the things that are a little bit like about this book. I never thought about like what kind of literature Isaac would go to if he studied English at university, but now I'm having many a headcanon. I'm literally developing academic headcanons for a fictional character. This is what 3 years of making bookish content will do to you. Okay, so I was not prepared at all when I started reading this poetry collection, but by the end of it, it's still one that I think about a lot. Crush by Richard Sykin is a poetry collection that's split into 3 parts, and Isaac reads this during the party in Paris and later when James comes out to have a conversation with him. In regards to this collection, there are a few content warnings that I feel like if you are affected by them in any way, then you should probably not read this poetry collection, as it does go into quite explicit detail about these content warnings. I'll probably try and have them listed in the description down below. Otherwise, checking Goodreads is probably also your best bet. And a lot of these poems do take time to process, as they are quite heavy in theme as well. There are a lot of poems in here that they're just quite rich in emotion, but a lot of like sadness and grief and hopelessness. And in an article for Sharewell, Roe Crawford notes that it's also worth noting that many of the poems here have grown from the death of Syken's boyfriend in the early 90s. Sometimes they seem to be speaking to a ghost. The frequent use of the second person pronoun throughout these poems creates such a degree of intimacy that it almost feels as like you, the reader, are the lost lover. From what Crawford says, it definitely does explain a lot of the depth that Syken does go into his poems and the kind of almost intimate nature that he has with the reader. But there's not to say it was all bleak. There were moments of beauty and wonder as well, and does try and give some hope at the end as well, with my favourite poem in the collection, Snow and Dirty Rain. They're just so romantic, but also so steeped in melancholy at the same time. It's just like a bittersweet poetry collection. And I do feel like by the end, you do get that general sense of catharsis, having worked through a lot of the things that Syken is portraying. And it is kind of reassuring in its own way. Whether I would recommend it though is very, very like, I don't know. But there are definitely 3 reasons why I think Isaac took crush with him on the Paris journey. Firstly, Syken is a gay poet, and we know Isaac loves to read books by gay writers, so that is basically the first and like surface level reason. Second one, if we were to analyze crush as the kind of romantic sense in the scene, given the fact that James is with Isaac when he's reading crush, it definitely goes to show that there could be a little bit of an inclination towards James's crush towards Isaac. But if you go with the third analysis, which is probably the one that I'm gonna go with, Crush is not a joyful book. It is one that is heart-wrenching and full of emotions and does go through some very like dark and deep stuff. And if we take that lens to the word crush, I think Isaac reading it kind of symbolizes the crushing pressure that he has to kind of find a way to conform to a society that prioritizes romance and sex and relationship. Because I feel like Isaac is trying to figure out why he doesn't feel the same way as everyone else does. And I also feel like this season a lot of characters are feeling crushed by the pressure of various things. And as a queer person of color, I have known that feeling all too well. But overall, I think that Syken has produced such a phenomenal poetry collection, and I do think I'll be going back to it every now and again for inspiration and contemplation. I know that the Sailor Moon t-shirt doesn't really make sense, but given the fact that it's a head on a book cover, I feel like a head on my t-shirt should kind of go with the theme of this. We now get on to our first nonfiction of the video, Boy Erased by Jerry Conley. And it's a memoir of identity, faith, and family following Conley's own experiences being the son of a Baptist pastor and his feelings of being terrified and conflicted about his sexuality. For the first book of episode 7, we see Isaac reading this book whilst texting the Paris gang, which, considering he's smiling about it, this book is very heavy. Following Conley's account of being outed and then being forced into an ultimatum where he either goes to a gay conversion camp or he loses his family. And so even though he's going through this 12-step program, he does find the strength and understanding to live as his authentic self and find forgiveness in that as well. And I definitely commend Conley for being able to write about his experiences, as there are some things I read in this book that are truly harrowing, and I can't even imagine like how it felt to go through those things. But I did have a bit of trouble with the non-linear narrative that this memoir takes, as sometimes it's a bit hard to follow when exactly certain things are taking place, and I do think this memoir does provide a detailed account of someone going through Conley's experiences. Like, there is still homophobia in this world, there's still transphobia, there's still racism, and like there are times where I just feel like it will never stop, but that's exactly what people who hate on other people want you to think. They want you to be weak and hopeless because that's when they win. But like with this channel, with shows like Heartstopper, Doctor Who, and shows with more queer affirming and diverse casts, it really goes to show that representation is important, as it shows that we're valid, we're here, and we deserve as much space as the people who try to hate on us every single day that we live. And we're carving out happy places and safe spaces where transphobes, TERFs, homophobes, and racists aren't allowed to be in. Unlike Isaac reading Proud from season 1, I'm sure he read Boy Erased in season 2 to get an added depth on someone else's experiences of queerness, of how people discovered and accepted their own sexuality. And I think the theme of covering the importance of living authentically as yourself is something that ultimately culminates at the end of this season. But before we get to that, we do have some more books to go through. Now that I'm wearing a shirt, I can literally just tucked this on, which is nice. But if you see the Sailor Moon shirt underneath, it just makes this outfit more gay. I have already read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, and I'm really happy to be talking about this book again, as it's one of my favorite collections of personal essays slash memoirs. And I'm just so happy to see Isaac reading it as well. And we see him read this in the part where he's basically confronting the gang about always talking to him about James and the fact that he doesn't really want to be talking about relationships all of the time, which was such a powerful moment from him, and I stan him for that, even more than I already do. All Boys Aren't Blue is a series of personal essays by George M. Johnson that explores childhood, adolescence, and college years in New Jersey and Virginia. It covers topics such as gender identity, toxic masculinity, brotherhood, family, structural marginalization, consent, and ultimately Black joy. And this is such a great book for queer teens, but more specifically Black queer teens to read, and it is another one that I feel like is required reading, especially because of the depth of these essays, but also how vulnerable and intimate Johnson is in each one of the essays. They write about being a Black queer person and also how those identities intersect and present a unique set of challenges. And I especially loved when Johnson would write about family and community, and ultimately they just prove that having a support system is massively important when you're on your own queer journey. I'd also highly recommend having the audiobook, as it is narrated by Johnson himself, and it's always such a different experience having the author read their work out loud. And so yeah, I would recommend it. And in here there were stories that I could relate to, that I feel like teens could relate to, and ultimately I feel like it's something that everyone should read at least once. As for why Isaac chose to read this book, again, I think it is just to expand his knowledge of queer history and the different perspectives that can arise from being queer and one of many intersections. Plus, I definitely feel like this is a book that Elle recommended to Isaac, and I just love that headcanon. Honestly, at this point, I'm just gonna be repeating outfits because a lot of books this season kind of coincide with each other in terms of outfits. So this is another memoir of intersectionality, and we absolutely love to see it. We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib is a queer Muslim memoir following Habib as they internalize the lesson from a very young age from their parents that revealing their identity could put them in grave danger. However, through explorations of faith, love, art, and queer sexuality, it is a journey that will take them around the globe to finally find that the truth was inside them all along. We see Isaac reading this at Elle's art exhibition, and like, whilst I do appreciate Isaac wanting to read more books, he does need to put down the books once in a while just to, you know, celebrate his friend's success. And like with All Boys Aren't Blue, I do feel like Isaac is reading this to get a bit more of a understanding of queer identities from different intersectionalities, in this instance a queer Muslim person. But I do definitely see him pursuing queer studies as a mode of criticism at university if he decides to go there and then get his master's and then get his PhD and then decide to become a lecturer in English. As for the memoir itself, it was an exceptional read and one that I was able to read in a single sitting, as I did read the audiobook along with this book, and it was just such a great experience, as like with Boy Erased, Habib takes us through their situation with their religion, and ultimately they form a new relationship with it as a queer Muslim. And there were two parts highlighted that I especially want to highlight. One was when Habib said, "Not everyone is equipped for activism in the traditional sense. Marching, writing letters to officials, but dedicating your life to understanding yourself can be its own form of protest, especially when the world tells you that you don't exist." There are many forms of activism, and not all of them are loud and in public. Some of them are quiet resistances that we have to take in order to protect ourselves. But when it comes to affirming your identity and acknowledging your existence, it ultimately is up to you what form of resistance you take. Additionally, there was also a notion about representation that I especially loved. Representation is a critical way for people to recognize that their experiences, even if invisible in the mainstream, are valid. With shows like Heartstopper, it is so important to have people represented on screen, and this show does such an amazing job at representing queer people from many different intersections. And you see through social media the amount of people who are represented by the show, and then sometimes it can get emotional because so many people just feel seen by this show, and it is amazing. Ultimately though, I cannot help but recommend this memoir to everyone, as it is just such an amazing read. And now it's one last hurrah for the blue outfit as we reach the final episode of Heartstopper Season 2, and I know that this book is going to be pivotal to Isaac, and the one that he's going to be recommending to people, and the one that he's going to talk about was a pivotal changing point for him in his life. And Isaac reads this book while setting up for prom with the rest of the Paris gang, and honestly, he's a multitasking king, and it's something that my neurodivergent ass could never do. Summer Bird Blue follows Rumi, who constantly worries that she won't have the answers, except that she does know that she wants to spend the rest of her life making music with her sister Leah. But then Leah dies, and her mother sends her off to her aunt in Hawaii, and now Rumi has to grapple with the feelings of grief for her sister, abandonment by her mother, and just the situation that she's now been put in. But with the help of some people that she meets, Rumi will find her way back to write the song that she and her sister never got to finish. This was such an emotional book. So many things about this that I absolutely loved, but the amount of emotional depth that I was put under, it was like Bowman was tugging at my heartstrings, but not like lightly. She like gripped them, like, oh. This story deals with loss, anger, acceptance, and just everything that these characters go through was certainly an experience that I don't think I'll be forgetting anytime soon. Bowman's writing was just so like lyrical and wonderful, and you could really feel like Rumi's voice come through in the pages. And Kai, Mr. Watanabe, and Rumi's aunt were just some of the most wonderful characters in this story, and the way they were developed and fleshed out was wonderful to see. And it's also a YA book that features an Arent Ace character front and center, and in their review, Alice Oseman notes that the standout element of this book for me was the Arent Ace representation in Rumi, the likes of which I had never seen before. Much of Rumi's journey in Summer Beer Blue explores her discovering and accepting her Arent Ace identity, and she does not end up in a relationship by the end. She made me feel strongly seen in a way I don't think I've ever felt in a book, and normal too. Since Oseman wrote that review in 2018, there have definitely been a lot more books in the YA space that do feature Arent Ace characters. However, there is always room for more, because when it comes to diverse literature, I always say too much is never enough. And as mentioned earlier, I do feel like Summer Beer Blue was a conscious choice by Alice to include in this season, as it does kind of start to begin Isaac's journey towards discovering that he's Arent Ace, and especially as we see later in the episode, as we'll come to next, like that kind of pivotal moment for him when he picks up a book. And it is often we as readers discover things about ourselves through the books that we read, and it's just wonderful to see that reflected on screen as well. Overall though, this book is absolutely amazing, and I would highly recommend that you check it out. I can't believe we've made it. Oh my god. The last book of the season, and arguably one of the most important books as well. And it's presented in such an emotional moment of the episode where Isaac returns to the read with Pride Stand and he picks up Ace by Angela Chen. It was just such a perfect sequence that I felt so proud of Isaac when he did it, because it really culminates the reading journey that he's had throughout this season. Through reading romance, through reading French literature, through reading these kind of explorations of loneliness and pain and suffering and all of that, it ultimately culminates in him realizing that maybe he's just something different altogether. It's validating, it's freeing, it's an awakening, and I absolutely loved the journey that we got to witness this season because of that. Ace by Angela Chen is an engaging exploration of what it means to be asexual, especially in a world that's obsessed with sexual attraction. Through interviews, criticism, and memoir, this book really invites everyone to view the world through the lens of asexuality, and also the many intersectional lenses that can apply to that as well. And again, it's definitely one that I also recommend listening to via audiobook, as I feel like it kind of listens like a podcast in some ways. When I say everyone should read this book, everyone should read this book. Like, even if you're considering reading this book, if you're watching this video right now, I would highly recommend you go pick this book up. If you're interested in learning more about different queer identities, I feel like this one really does go into a lot of depth about asexuality, aromanticism, and again, the intersectionalities of that. And Chen really grapples with the complicated nature of sexuality, romance, and relationships, and really shows us how we can change our approach to discussing these conversations. I definitely think this is a great starting point for those who want to learn more about aromanticism, asexuality, and for Isaac, it's definitely going to be a great point for him to kind of begin his own queer journey, and I'm really excited to see where that's going to lead into in season 3. And I just love how Chen really discusses the intersectionality of asexuality with like feminism, disability, race, amongst other things as well. And I'm just really happy now that Isaac is reading this book and maybe recommending it to his friends, and they can start like a little Parascam book club where they all read this book to understand Isaac a bit more, and it's just, oh, it's so lovely. And like, I'm just really excited for him and happy for him that he's finally like starting a journey to realize who he is. And yeah, that is basically all of the books that Isaac read in Heartstopper season 2. So now let us wrap this all up. And I literally can't even believe we're at the end now. It just feels like it's been so long since I begun this journey, but for you, it's probably been like, what, an hour? Together, we have adventured through 18 books that Isaac read in Heartstopper Season 2, including Where's Wally at the back there, and you've watched me read 17 and a half of them. Sorry, lamers. Through this exploration, we've been able to gather 3 new insights about Isaac's reading habits and his reading taste. He's reading a lot more French literature, which kind of goes to show that if he's going to a new country, he will try and read the literature of that country in order to get a greater sense of its, I guess, national identity. 2, Isaac also does like reading romances and reads quite a few of them this season of like varying time periods and I guess subgenres of romance, which I think is quite interesting. And 3, Isaac definitely does read a lot of books that give an insight into his character, other characters, or just like what's going on in the show as a whole. And although they're quite subtle, it does also align with his prior reading tastes as well, which I feel like is pretty awesome. And again, it's just been phenomenal to be able to like sit here with you and read 17 and a half, but 18 books that a fictional character read in a fictional show. It just feels like so surreal to me, and I thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today. And if you've read any of these books, or if you have your own opinions, be sure to put them down in the comments section, as well as any recommendations that you have for Isaac for books that you want to see him read. I have just realized I haven't come up with my own recommendations for him, but I will try over probably the few days that after this video is up. I'm gonna try and come up with my own suggestions, and I'll share them on my Instagram stories. And okay, I know this is gonna be a little far-fetched, but I would really love to work as like a book coordinator on season 4 of Heartstopper. Like, I know season 3 is currently filming, so there's not a chance, but I would really love it if I was able to like pick all of the books that Isaac read for one season. I think it would just be so cool, and it's probably far out of the realm of possibility, but one can wish. So for now, thank you so much for joining me today. I massively appreciate all of you for being here, especially because like we now have a play button, and it just means so much to me, all of you commenting, sharing on your socials, tagging me, and just sharing your love of my content and your love of reading. It means a lot, and it really motivates me. Hopefully you'll be sharing your love of gaming and other things that I eventually branch into in 2024. Again, a massive thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. The first 500 people to use the link in my description will get a free 30-day trial and 40% off their first year of Skillshare. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here, be sure to click that subscribe button so you're notified whenever I upload next. I'll have all my social medias in the description down below for you, so you can follow me on every single other platform. Be sure to join our Discord and our book club for the various goodies that we have on those. And so yeah, I guess until the next time, I'm bye actually. Bye besties.